Alright, this is where things get good. Like, really good. Sadly, I first started watching Breaking Bad when it was in its final season, but I could not imagine what it would have been like having to wait an entire week after the half measures cliffhanger. Honestly, has to be one of hands down the top 3 best cliffhangers at the end of an episode of all time. Overall, Season 3 has a couple of different story elements going on, but remains clear in its direction and gets more and more in-depth into the psychology of the characters. Walt begins in an incredible crossroad. He was paid his large sum of money for his entire product, he's no longer cooking, and he received surgery for his cancer. Things could potentially go well for him now if not for the fact of the tirade of consequences from his actions of the first 2 seasons. A butterfly effect of bad events caused a massive plane collision above his town, in which he is adjacently responsible for, trying to ease his guilt of that entire process as the town mourns, and as Jesse sits in rehab each and every day, it's a constant reminder of Jane's death and his experiences. Skyler, his wife, has also decided to separate from him, calling him out for his lies, forcing Walt to move out of the house, and even guessing correctly that he is somehow involved with drugs. Walt, dealing with trying to put his family back together, runs the gamut of being sympathetic and hilarious, the pizza on the roof scene, of course, but also being extremely disturbing, because Skyler knows that he's involved with drugs, but refuses to tell their son because it would ruin his image of how he looks up to his father, Walt. So, as Walt essentially forces himself back into the house, which is technically his house also, so, there's a lot of different lines being crossed here, Skyler is terrified and unable to tell the truth because of their son, and in fact, still doesn't even know the whole truth. And I mentioned this before, but again, look, I don't think that Skyler is like an S-tier character or anything like that, but from her perspective of events, what she does and what she's experiencing is scary, and her reactions make sense. Yes, she does go and have sex with her boss Ted, and yes, she does do it to piss off Walt as a form of an attack, but she's trying to get Walt to leave her, to sign the divorce papers, to be done with this, but she can't do anything violent and she can't go to the cops, so hey, why not fuck your boss and hit him where it really hurts? Things get even worse when Jesse gets out of rehab. He's broken and distraught from Jane's death and feeling like he has nothing and nobody, and so he resorts to the only thing that he thinks he can do, well, cooking meth, though this time not partaking in any of it himself. And this time working without Walt, which causes even more friction. And I love the scene where Walt sees Jesse's product, and you can tell that he is furious because it's just as good as when they cook together. This makes him feel inferior because to him, even though he has affection for Jesse, he views Jesse as the inferior one, somebody that would need his help in order to make it. And all those years of him being a student and not applying himself, once you make a strong impression of who a person is in your mind, it's really hard to break that vision when they change or when they progress in life. I think that's the theme of the series also, and also lends to why Hank never suspected Walt. He already had a version of Walt in his mind of a weak and docile man, so it's going to take something incredibly drastic in order to change that perception. There's also even more consequences coming into play with what I'm going to call the main antagonists of the first half of the season. These are the twins, the Salamanca cousins of Tuco that viciously make their way up past the border and into the States to try to find and kill the ones responsible for Tuco's death. Walt literally would have been hacked up to death with an axe in episode 2 if not for the intervention of Gus Fring. Gus becomes a lot more of a presence in this season. We get to see his entire underground super lab, capable of creating large batches of product daily, and his request for Walt to run it. Walter, the failed chemist who now gets to run his own laboratory, not to mention get paid about $1 million a month to do so. Not a bad deal. Between the money, his family's well-being, to stop Jesse from selling, and being that he's already this far in, the temptation eventually takes its course and Walt begins working for Gus full-time. I also really like Hank's journey this season. We've already seen how he keeps that jokingly bravado facade around his peers, but truly has a very difficult time dealing with his PTSD and past experiences. When they offer him to go back to Texas, the place where he watched a severed head on a turtle blow up, blowing a bunch of people into pieces, well, he tries to distract himself by throwing all of his efforts back into the Heisenberg blue meth case, an excuse to not have to face up to those types of experiences again, but sadly, one that leads him to even worse events. Tracking down RVs eventually lead him to Jesse, and after a quick lie to throw him off their trail long enough to dispose of the RV, Hank shows up at Jesse's doorstep and viciously beats him out of anger and frustration. As a result, Hank is suspended from the police force, and we get a lot of really intimate moments with him and Marie. And no, I'm not talking about that awkward hospital handjob. Yeah. Hank has to come to face with his own consequences, that there are both a desire to do the right thing within him, but also this need to prove his justification for staying in town for that specific case, which drove him to this. And I really like those moments between him and Marie when Hank gets kind of vulnerable. I kind of really enjoy seeing Hank within that position and see that there's a lot more to him than was originally shown back in season 1. But ultimately, two paths collide, and the Salamanca twins come to exact vengeance on Hank, just as he was stripped of his badge and gun. Of course, it's all a ploy by Gustavo Fring to throw the twins off of Walt, start a feud that makes crossing the border even harder, and take territory away from the cartel, all at the expense of one single DEA agent, Hank. Though Hank is given a warning and is able to fight back, he does manage to incapacitate one of the twins and kill the other, but he is shot several times himself in the process, and keeping the show grounded within reality, this is a major issue to deal with. Hank is unable to walk for the entire rest of the season and well into season 4. His medical bills skyrocket and they're not sure how they're going to pay it, and he loses what leftover feelings of self-worth he once had. It's actually an incredibly tragic ending, and we don't really get any kind of solace for Hank the rest of the season. We leave with him being broken. But after that, things turn around for a little bit. Jesse gives a heart-wrenching speech to Walt in the hospital, probably one of Aaron Paul's best performances, leading Walt to replace his current assistant Gail with Jesse, effectively getting the two of them back together and working again. Skyler also starts to come around to Walt very slowly, once she sees just how much money he's making, thinking about how desperate he was when he thought he was going to die, and wanting to help Hank and Marie with their bills. Somehow Walt does manage to bring her into the fold, kind of. She eventually is more okay with him staying in the house, and she wants to help professionally launder their money, but she's kept at enough of a distance that it's more of a out of sight, out of mind, just don't get caught kind of thing. But it's also just another piece of Walt's corruption spreading to everybody around him. Season 3 also has probably the most controversial episode called The Fly. It's a bottle episode, which means an episode that takes place all in one location. It focuses on Walt trying to get a fly out of the lab, which he calls a contaminant, and Jesse eventually joins in. Now, I always consider this episode to be the perfect example to figure out if you are a plot or character person when it comes to stories that you enjoy. People that are invested mostly in plot hate this episode because truly the plot does not progress. It stays focused on Walt and Jesse having conversations with each other the entire episode. However, character people love this episode precisely for that reason. And look, neither is incorrect. You can enjoy stories however you want to. Some people want the plot and narrative to continuously progress because that's essentially what storytelling is. But people like myself are far more interested in what's going on within a character's head. I've said before, if you have great characters, you could give me an entire movie of them just sitting down eating dinner, and I would probably enjoy it. This episode focuses on Walt dealing with not just the events of the show so far, but the realization that he is stuck here essentially forever. He gave up his soul, and there's no going back from this point. The Fly is just a distraction from him dealing with the realities of his current situation. He talks about how he wished he had died. He wished that the cancer did kill him, and that Skyler never found out what he was doing, and that he can't believe how long this has gone on for, and who he's actually become. It's a real introspective episode. And the fact that he almost confesses to Jesse about Jane. He keeps telling Jesse that he's sorry, and Jesse is like, it's fine, it's not your fault, it's not my fault. But Walt's apology is so true and sincere that you almost forget what a horrible person he can be at times. Ultimately, Fly is an episode that you're either going to love or you're going to hate, but I personally am on the side of loving it. Now, the final piece of this season brings back the plot point of season 2 and Combo, one of Jesse's friends and sellers that was killed while dealing. Turns out that area was Gus's territory and he had a hand in it. The final 2 episodes are a roller coaster ride of anxiety. You have Jesse wanting to poison the 2 men responsible, Walt trying to talk him down and find a way to stop Jesse's involvement, and then we get one of my favorite scenes in the entire series, which is when Mike shows up to Walt's house and gives him the half-measure speech that the episode is titled after. We learn that Mike used to be a cop and how he would always give warnings to this domestic abuse call, how Mike wanted to just kill the guy. Ultimately, one time Mike stuck a gun in the guy's mouth and gave him that warning, that half measure, but after letting him go, he still wound up killing his spouse. Moral of the story being that half measures don't solve the problem. The way that Mike delivers the story is haunting, and I think it's one of his best character moments.
I chose a half measure when I should have gone all the way. I'll never make that mistake again.
When Jesse goes to kill the 2 men and Walt drives in to save his life, it is one of the only moments that the first time I watched it, I actually verbally screamed. I think I might have even stood up from the couch, which almost never happens. And the way Walt just runs over and shoots the second guy in the head, like, okay, I know these guys are drug runners and they had just murdered a child, so justified, sure, but it was still a shock to see Walt just so casually kill someone. He hadn't killed anybody hands-on since Crazy 8 in season 1, and that took him an entire episode to build up the courage to do it. So it just shows how far Walt has changed within that time also. The last episode puts Walt and Jesse into a corner. Gus needs the lab to run, and without them, Gale, who was Walt's former assistant, would be the only person that could run it. So Walt sees no other solution but to kill Gale, forcing Gus to keep them alive. So it's a race to stay hidden, find where Gale is located, and then go there and pull the trigger. At first, Walt agrees to do it, but then Mike and Victor snatch him up and take him to the lab in order to get rid of him. And I love Walt's cries and pleas to make his phone call to Jesse. The acting is so real, and you really feel Walt's terror in this moment. And you also get that brilliant switch once he does make the call and tells Jesse to go kill Gale, because then he has them right where he wants them. Walt speaks with this confidence again, and he owns the room as Mike and Victor wonder just what the fuck just happened. But the moral quandary is Gale, and he's, for lack of a better word, innocent. Okay, yeah, he was cooking meth, but he's just a nerd. He wouldn't hurt anybody, he wouldn't wish poorly on Walt and Jesse, he didn't even plot any vengeance when he was replaced. He's just a guy. And now Jesse, who's never shot and killed anyone in his life, is forced to put a bullet into this pleading man's head as the gun fires and the season ends. I consider season 3 to be where Breaking Bad really begins to shift into high gear. Actually, towards the end of season 3 is where the show hits its halfway point, and you can feel that. It's like it was slowly climbing up a roller coaster, and when it reaches the halfway mark, we are now on our way down. Things get faster, more chaotic, scarier, and there's no turning back at this point. Let me know what you guys think about season 3 down below. What was your favorite moment, favorite episode, or an experience you had the first time you watched it? Thanks a lot for watching this video, guys. Please give it a thumbs up and a comment to help it in the algorithm. I'd appreciate it if you did so. Check the links below to follow me elsewhere, or you can support the channel on that deeper level by joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member. But beyond that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.